Apparently we do have a quorum at this point, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. It feels like it's been a while. I feel a little rusty after the holidays and all. Did anyone have any introductions, new staff that they wanted to introduce to the group this week? This month? Okay.
One thing that I forgot to mention earlier, if you are interested, the live stream is also available in the 757 room. But again, as always, if you're a voting member or want to comment, please stay here. If you just want to view the live stream, there's another option there.
Okay, were there any other starting announcements before we move into the rest of the agenda?
Yeah.
Okay, item number 3 is approval of agenda. If anyone has any questions before we do that, otherwise I'll look for a motion.
Move to approve.
We have a motion
Second.
and a second. Was there any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 4 is our public comment period. For public comments, these are limited to per individual. Did we have any public, I assume public comment on that voting today. Did we have any public here that wanted to speak on any topic? Or did we receive any public comments? So is there public comment for the agenda this month? And we have no submitted public comments for this month. So, moving on to item number 6, comments and updates from our state and federal agencies and our military partners. I guess we're just gonna go around, we're gonna ask the TPO staff to go ahead and help us to go around, make sure I don't miss anyone. If you want to start with Doc.
Good morning. I do have a couple updates for the group. At last month's TTAC meeting, I provided a brief update on transportation revenues here in the Commonwealth. I did want to give an update this morning on the latest information on revenues. I am happy to report that the Commonwealth Transportation Board did adopt a revision to the FY 2022 to 2027 6-year improvement plan at their January 12th meeting. That better? All right. The revised program that the CTB adopted incorporates the December revenue forecast as well as new federal funding in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, as it's become known. The total value of the highway construction program increase went from $17.2 billion to $22.1 billion. That's nearly a $5 billion increase over the 6-year time frame. In most cases, the additional funds actually flow through the regular transportation construction formula to core programs. So for instance, let's to Smart Scale, CMAC, RSEP, State of Good Repair, Safety, and our Interstate Operations Enhancement Program. So for now, the additional funds were placed on balance entries for allocation in the next solicitation cycle for each program. The increase in RSEP and CMAC has been programmed to our TPO's balance entries for allocation in the FY 2023 update that I'm sure we'll discuss a lot more at the upcoming Transportation Programming Subcommittee, which will be held later this month. I did want to announce that there are some new programs in the IIJA that have been added to the 6-year plan. Just a couple of examples include a few programs, one called Carbon, which is for reducing carbon emissions from on-road highway sources. Another is Protect, which is focused on improving the resiliency of highways. There's one for electric vehicle charging, vulnerable road users, which is for bike and pedestrian safety, and bridge. With the exception of the bridge funding, these funds have been placed on balance entries pending further guidance from Federal Highway and our administration regarding deployment of these funds for the new programs. There is also a proposal to use a portion of the transportation set-aside program funding to establish a new regional trails program. That's reflected in the 6-year plan as well. So there'll be more information coming out on Also, I did want to go over a couple of key provisions in the budget bill, the state's budget bill, that will require General Assembly action. One item is a good news story. There is a proposal to accelerate revenue sharing program funding to years 3 and 4 of the 6-year plan in lieu of 5 and 6. As everybody's aware, under COVID, with the COVID impacts, we had to shift revenue sharing funding to the last 2 years of the 6-year program. So for the upcoming cycle, we're looking at shifting that funding sooner to years 3 and 4. As well, we're going to be accelerating funding from the last round of projects from FY25 and 26 to FY22 and 23. So more information will be coming on that. Again, that still will require General Assembly action. So that is in the budget bill currently. There's also a couple other provisions in the budget bill being proposed. One is a recommendation that came out of JLARC study that recommends VDOT to further evaluate the distribution of funds for city street maintenance payments. So there'll be additional conversation, stakeholder groups, I'm sure, including a lot of folks in this group too. So more to come on that. As we begin working on developing the 23 to 28 6-year plan, we certainly will provide detailed information in the coming months. In the meantime, I do encourage you to review the presentations that were given at the January 12th CTB meeting by our Chief Financial Officer and our Director of Investment Infrastructure Director, as well as our Deputy Secretary, Nick Donahue. I also wanted to mention that there will be public hearings coming up in the spring. They right now tentatively scheduled to be in person, and we're working on dates right now for those. So there'll be additional information coming out on that. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to take them, but I'll be happy to share additional information at next TTAC meeting as it comes in.
Thank you. Was there anything from DRPT this evening?
Yes, good morning. So first off, we wanted to provide an update on HJ 542, our Transit Equity and Modernization Study. We reported roughly throughout the whole last year about progress on the study, and we had submitted the interim report. It is now available on the project website, which is vatransitequity.com. This interim report showcases the study's initial findings based off the 6 technical area analyses, as well as outreach with transit agencies and the public. We are going to be using this interim report to inform our next phase, which is the action plan. That will serve as the blueprint for advancing how we proceed with transit equity and modernization efforts throughout the Commonwealth. My next item is related to our FY23 grant cycle. We just closed all applications as of 11:59 p.m. yesterday. For the TPOs and MPOs, our Section 5303 grant applications are still available. Those will be due May 2nd. And so if there are any questions about that, please feel free to reach out to me or any of your DRPT contacts. We anticipate having funding estimates around mid-February, so roughly around February 18th or so. So expect to see an email from us with that information. Related to Smart Skill Round 5, I know VDOT provides ample technical assistance, but if you have any transit or rail applications heading into the pre-application period in March, we do have 2 points of contacts, one for transit, which would be Taylor Jenkins, and then one for rail, which is Randy Selleck. And I provided their contact information in my agency update for the minutes. Last, we wanted to provide kind of information about federal planning emphasis areas. We received a notice from FHWA as well as FTA about updated planning emphasis areas on January 5th for incorporation to your UPWPs as well as in state planning and research work programs. So we just want to highlight some of the areas that are advancing equity and environmental justice in transportation planning, as well as advancing towards greenhouse gas reduction goals and resilience to extreme weather events. So we are wanting to provide that as kind of a highlight. We want to also highlight us as a partner in terms of how you can incorporate some of those efforts into your state planning process. And in my agency update, I provided a link to the notice for more information. Last item is kind of a technical item. It's related to transportation improvement programs. We did send out a notice around late December to all of our TPO and MPO staff about the change in FTA requirements related to Section 5310 projects. They are asking that we are going to highlight any of the FY23 projects under FY22, so the under the federal fiscal year versus what we usually highlight in the state. They have asked to do that so that matches the allocation for the work funds. So as you get information from from us in about March, April, about what projects are moving forward, we just ask to make sure that is highlighted under FY '22. And that is all I have for my agency update. I gave Kathleen the updates, so she can have to write as much notes.
Federal highways. Virginia Port Authority, are there any updates?
Good morning, no report this morning.
And Navy?
Nothing for the group this morning, thank you.
Okay, were there any other agencies or groups that would like to report this morning?
Madam Chair, I'd like to add additional VDOT comment. Just a quick smart sale update. The website has changed a little bit, so I behoove you to go out and take a look at smartsale.org. The next training for the pre-applicants is February 22nd, so you guys should get a notification from the portal on that. The pre-applications open March 1st. They will close on April the 1st at 11:59 p.m. You'll be able to also see on the new website the 2021 V-Trans needs as well as the 2019 V-Trans needs. One thing to find the resources now, you will have to look at the section that says apply now in order to find the resources. And on the resource page is an updated draft guidance. Also, there is a presentation, additional information on pre-scoping that should help you through the process, and also information about round 5 changes. The major round 5 changes are related to environmental buffers versus being a quarter of a mile. Now they're tiered, it's a tiered approach, 30 feet, 1/8 mile, and 1/4 mile, but it's all based on the type of project. That guidance is provided in the presentation. And also there's a new buffer distance for land development for bike walk distance. You used to could use a buffer up to 3 miles. That buffer has been reduced to 1 mile. So hopefully if you have not been contacted by Jerry Pauling on our staff, you should be getting a call from him shortly to discuss any assistance you need with getting your pre-applications complete. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to address.
Were there any questions for VDOT regarding that information or? Okay, moving to agenda item number 7, I'm going to turn this over to Tim with the election committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Robert Lewis wasn't able to be here, so he asked me to report for the nominating committee. We've had discussions since the last TTAC meeting to talk about filling the position of recently vacated position of vice chair. And as you know, our policy is to alternate back and forth between the south side and the north side. And I say north side instead of peninsula because we don't want to exclude Gloucester, of course. And with that in mind, on behalf of the committee, I am pleased to nominate Carol Rizzi from Gloucester County for the position of TTAC vice chair.
Can we confirm that Carol is willing
I would not do that to her.
Just happy to serve. We get so much out of our involvement with this committee, and hopefully I'll do you guys justice.
So I believe the motion, is that how it is?
So moved.
Second? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion?
Thank you.
If there's no discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion approved. Now we have a vice chair. Item number 8, there is approval of the consent items. There are 2 items in the package. Hopefully everyone had a chance to review them. If there's any questions or comments on the items in the package, Otherwise, we'll take a motion to approve. We have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion on the consent items? If there's no additional discussion, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 9 is the state of transportation and Hampton Roads 2021 final report. We're not going to have an actual presentation on this. It's already been put out for public review and it's already been presented to TTAC here a couple of times. So TPO, have anything they wanted to add before we go?
The TPO heard a presentation, I believe, in November, they got it earlier because we combined it as part of another system performance presentation. They did not have comments, they had questions on some of the information, but nothing that changed. But if you have tough questions, Kate's in the audience, so we can answer all the questions.
So based on that, unless there's other questions, I'd like to take a motion. Or I'm sorry, a motion on the item. We have a motion and a second. Are there any additional discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 10 looks like a presentation from Steve on. Okay, Steve Lambert from HRTPO and Sarah Kidd from the PDC regarding level of traffic stress analysis for the city of Hampton.
Thank you. Good morning. Today we're here. We're updating you guys on the draft level of traffic stress analysis that we did for the city of Hampton. I'm Steve Lambert and Sarah Kidd helped me with the analysis and the report, and she'll be presenting with me today. As localities build out their bike and pedestrian networks across the country, planners have developed new methods to analyze their street network. The level of traffic stress analysis is one tool that can assist localities in defining the best roads for their network. As part of this, we provided this tool and analysis to our localities at our active transportation subcommittee a couple years back, and the city of Hampton responded and requested to have an analysis done. The city then provided the necessary road network data for Sarah to produce the analysis. And due to the pandemic, the analysis was delayed a little bit. She was kind of busy with some COVID statistics and stuff on our website that she was doing last year. And but we're excited to present it today to you. With that being said, I'm going to go over briefly what a level of traffic stress analysis is. And then Sarah's going to be discussing the methodology to her analysis. As part of the development of the tool and of the draft report, Hampton staff has had time to review and comment on both. Regarding the types of users we are discussing concerning bicycle networks, we want to make sure that everybody understands that we're looking for all types of users, as you can see on the screen. Also, we want our facilities to allow all of these users to feel comfortable, and that's part of the level of traffic stress analysis. So here's the fun part. So regarding the different levels of traffic stress, there are 4 different levels. LTS 1 provides a strong separation except low speed, low volume traffic, and it has simple to use crossings and should be suitable for children. LTS 2, users have their own place to ride that keeps them from interacting with traffic, except at formal crossings and except in low speed, low volume traffic situations. It also has physical separation from higher speed, multi-lane traffic and crossings that are easy for an adult to negotiate. It is also the limit to what the mainstream adult population can tolerate. LTS 3, users interact with moderate speed or multi-lane traffic or close proximity to higher speed traffic. LTS 3 is only acceptable to the enthused and confident on the last slide. LTS 4 now involves being forced to mix with moderate speed traffic or close proximity to high speed traffic. LTS 4 is only acceptable to the strong and fearless, which is the 1% of our bike users. Now Sarah's going to go to discuss the methodology of our study.
Okay, so good morning. So for the methodology portion, yes, this was kind of fun, something new to dive into. So this methodology was originally developed on behalf of the Mineta Transportation Institute. There were independent researchers who did the project initially, but it was published by the Institute. And they basically offered this as a new alternative to looking at stress for active transportation. There's some other models out there that it's a little more complicated and the data is a little bit harder to get. So they thought this methodology would be useful for folks who have a harder time getting the data together, and it's not so complicated. So this is the one that we looked at. It was originally done about 10 years ago, and they did update some of the criteria in 2017, which is what we used. So we looked at only the road segments for the analysis to look at the stress. The full analysis would include doing some intersection analysis, intersection approaches. But for this is sort of a proof of concept, right? A little bit of a, can we do this with the data that we have? So we just concentrate on the road segments for now, which to get started was actually perfectly fine. So. All right, success with clicking. So, as far as the methodology with the inputs for the model, based for the scores of the 1 through 4 that Steve just talked about, this is what you need. You need the number of lanes for the road segment, the effective ADT, average daily traffic, which is the volume measurement. You need speed limits. You need to know where are your bike facilities if you have them. Presence of parking lanes, especially if they're next to bicycle lanes, and then also the widths of those. So the sources for this data came primarily from GIS. So this was primarily GIS analysis. And so we started with the state has a road centerline file that they maintain on a quarterly basis at VGen, the Virginia Geographic Information Network. And they do incorporate data tables from VDOT, so we can get that information. Of course, the city of Hampton provided their road centerline file that they maintain. They also gave us where their bike lanes are and known parking lanes. Then we did Steve did a little field work to catch the widths of those lanes to go make sure we kind of had an idea for around the whole city what that might be. And then of course, some aerial imagery and some Google Street View was helpful to do a little bit of ground truthing, especially with the bike lanes, to make sure they were starting and ending where we thought they were, because you can see those usually from those two products. So for the data manipulation portion, this is probably what took the most time, was because you need to bring all that data together, right? And so sometimes the data doesn't match. It's not going to be perfect. So one of the biggest issue it ran into in trying to bring the information from the state layer to the local layer was that there was no unique ID common between them in order to join the information together. So that took a little bit of GIS analysis to try to make that happen. But in the end, we got some results there, so we were able to combine all of that data together in one layer. So we did move the information now all is in the road center lines from the city of Hampton. So we use their geometry. Again, as I mentioned up there, the geometry didn't quite match. So that was another issue with the IDs, and that's the imagery there shows that the pink, I believe, is the VDOT and the blue is the city. So it's a little bit off. So again, we had to do a little bit of analysis there to make that work. So we did use the city's road center lines for the final product and then just removed some of, they had extra, the private drives and some parking things that wouldn't be part of the analysis. Then we used the VDOT attributes when available for the most part, and then information from the Hampton center line to sort of fill in those gaps. So as I mentioned, you know, when you're trying to model the real world, the data is never perfect. And this is true for this analysis that we did have to make some assumptions. There were some holes, but it's okay. We were able to figure out a way to do that, particularly for the number of lanes. We didn't have that for some of the local data, so we used a functional class instead, sort of as a proxy to fill that in and estimate what the number of lanes would be, just based on if it was a local road or whatnot. And then for the traffic volume, the methodology calls for the ADT, but the VDOT reports an AADT with their data. And in this case, I didn't feel like the difference would probably be that great. It was just use those numbers instead, because that's really all that we had for that. Now, for the local roads, the smaller roads that didn't have that information, we did have to come up with a value so that every road segment had some sort of reasonable value in order to run the final analysis. And so this table shows the values that we chose based on a functional class. And this came from another NPO that was doing this analysis. I believe it was in Fort Worth. And they just chose to do a median value based on the class, and then use that one number to fill in places where you didn't have a value. So for the final run, so once the data is all put together, which actually took the most time, then it was a little more straightforward than to choose or to go through and assign the stress value based on all of that criteria. And that comes from the tables that were published in the original study. This is an example of just one of them, and there are actually 3 tables if you're interested to look at that. That's in the report. This is for mixed traffic, which is when there's no bike lane, so it's just bicycles riding with traffic. And so there you can see you choose the number of lanes, the volume, and then the speed, and then it gets assigned to one of those classifications right there. So the other the other table was for bike lanes that have no parking lanes next to them, and then the third table was bike lanes with a parking lane. Again, with the parking lane, there's always the added stress of maybe the door might come open if you're riding along, and so they have a separate table for that. But I think there ended up not being much length for that in Hampton, so there weren't too many of those. So once all the road segments got assigned to a class, then we can produce the final map here. And it looks, even with all the data assumptions that we had to do, it actually turned out quite well, and it looks like what you would expect with the neighborhoods primarily being the level 1, the low stress, on up into some of the busier roads with the 3 and level 4. But what you can also, hopefully you can, just by looking at this map, that the low stress areas are what they were calling islands, right? That there's islands of low stress that in the barrier are these higher stress roads. And so that's part of the start of the planning. So how do we figure out how to get people from these lower stress areas to another one, crossing through the higher. So that's the idea with then trying to take this further with the intersection study. Again, there's a chart there for the total length based on class, and so most of the roads there are the local roads are in green there, so that's the highest number in terms of length. Just a little bit of a summary. I've mentioned these things as I was talking, but so yeah, the data quality is important for an analysis like this. But as I found, there's many other NPOs and DOTs and local governments that have used this LTS analysis, and probably all of them have run into some kind of issue because the data, it's difficult to have this data for every single road segment in your city. So do the best that we can, but just, into going forward, just, keep working on that data quality, and that will be helpful for any analysis in the future. And then if you really want to go deep, we can improve the analysis by doing some connectivity work. The original paper went into more detail on that. But you have to do some analysis on the intersections and the crossings and the approaches. They look at things like right turn lanes and those types of signal, where there's signals and not signals and that type of thing. So that really concludes the methodology part, and I'll let Steve wrap it up.
Thank you, Sarah. So as she did the analysis, so some of the things that we were able to take away from this analysis is that, one, we learned that Hampton does lend itself well to having a high percentage of low-stress roadways. We also learned that there's possibly improvement via signage and wayfinding on these low-stress roadways. You can also, there's potential to direct the bicyclists to less congested roadways, LTS 1 and 2. And also, in some circumstances, there's also can be potentials in the future for conversion of on-street parking on LTS 1 roadways to bike lanes. And also, like Sarah was talking about, there is a need to, we learned that there is a need to identify the major gaps and barriers in the networks that she was talking about, because we have these green islands, but how do we get across these main roads? And so for next steps, currently we are going to be applying this analysis to our regional trails networks as part of our regional trail report that I'm currently working on. And we're hoping that there's going to be a potential to apply this to another locality in the near future. And lastly, please review the draft report and submit comments by February 16th. And my email's up there if you don't know it. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve and Sarah. Did anyone have any questions?
Madam Chair. So Steve, how do you determine what the next locality, who will be up next? Are you putting an application?
That's a good question, Carl. So, like we talked about a couple of years ago at our active transportation subcommittee meeting, really, I mean, if there's a locality interest, just please email me. And the biggest thing is that we need to be able to get the GIS data of your locality, but if you're interested, we can assist with you and we can sit down and talk about it. So,
Thank you.
no problem.
Were there any other questions? I have one as well. I know completing the study, there were other factors involved and some back and forth, but in general, if someone was looking to do it from start to finish, how long do you think it would have taken or it did take?
Well, I know Sarah can probably answer a little bit more on this. Really, the biggest thing is building the methodology and the analysis tool. Sarah can probably talk a little bit more about that inside GIS and all that, because she's the technical person that did it. So.
Well, it's hard to say because I had to work on and off with pandemic and everything, but the data part, it was the most difficult and time-consuming part, was pulling the data together. So it kind of just depends what you're starting with there. But if you had somebody working on it full time, you could probably get it through it, within a few months, maybe. The part with the assigning the level of stress to the road segment, I actually wrote like a little script so that we could actually use that for other people and you wouldn't have to do that piece of it. So the data part is, the most time consuming.
Thank you.
Yeah, like she said, I mean, I think the good thing about this is it's kind of like our test project of learning this. And I think going forward for Sarah, it's going to be a little bit easier for us. So.
We just really appreciate, I know we had some data gaps in the GIS, and we appreciate you all working with us and what we could provide, where we could provide. But for anybody else who's interested in this, it was really helpful for us as we were looking at some projects that we thought would make a big impact, and then looking again at the level of stress. It really didn't take us as far as conceptually we had thought, so it actually helped us defer some projects that have been kind of lingering. So if people are looking for applicable ways to move forward with this, it was really helpful just looking at where we could make those connections and where we could get the biggest bang for our buck. So thank you both for all your work.
Thank you, Lynn.
Were there any other questions?
You want to keep it?
I just want to say fantastic work, Steve and Sarah. I thought this was a great analysis. It certainly helps with the LRTP prioritization as well to help us refine some of our criteria that we're looking at when we're evaluating active transportation projects. And then like Steve said, we are applying the LTS to Birthplace of America, South Hampton Rose Trail, and Elizabeth River Trail as part of this regional trails report. And then Carl, to your point, and Steve's response, if other localities are interested, please let Steve know. If we have a lot, obviously we can't do them all. So we'll have to weigh which locality we do next. But just wanted to make it fun.
Just another comment too, for some of the more rural localities, I would assume that to some degree, you could focus your efforts instead of doing the entire locality. I mean, I'm thinking, for example, in Alawite, if we wanted to, we could focus on, for example, our northern area or our town areas versus our entire county with rural areas that we know are not particularly connected or particular transportation routes. You don't have to analyze the entire.
No, and so for instance, like our regional trails report that I'm working on, the idea that we're gonna be looking at is these regional trails that we have. So for instance, the South Hampton Road Trail, Carl knows, we have some segments that aren't rail to trail. So we're gonna use this tool to kind of analyze that alignment and see what type of facility, if we were to add, can change it from an LTS 3 to an LTS 2 or 1. And then, so like for instance, with a rural county, we could say, oh, we just wanna look at this little proper area in the downtown area or this subdivision, like, we can do that, yeah.
So it's also scalable within, it's not, that doesn't have to be city-wide to be useful.
No.
Are there any other questions or comments? Also in the full agenda, the website address of where the document can be reviewed is in there as well as the timeline for public comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, item number 11 is Ron Hodges from HRT with the traffic study report.
Good morning. Each year I come here to talk about something I truly believe in. The traffic program that you support, finance. It's a program that is designed to mitigate traffic congestion as much as we can, get people out of driving alone in their cars and into something else, whether it's teleworking or van pooling or carpooling. In spite of the pandemic that we've had to deal with for the last 2 years, we've made some pretty good traction and continue to do that. The world is commuting differently today. It's when you consider teleworking as part of that commuting process, we've really gone over the top on that one. In fact, we really don't necessarily always have to sell that program. The teleworking program, but we still sell carpooling and we still sell van pooling. And van pooling in its earlier pandemic timeframe had a pretty significant decrease because people did not want to drive close together. But in the last year or so, that is starting to change. We've had about a 12% increase in van pooling over FY20. And in FY21, this is what we're talking about today. The mission that we have is not only getting people in other forms of transportation, but also encouraging them to bike and to walk to work. And that's had an increase from FY20 to 21 when we go and talk to businesses about doing something differently. That has also increased. We do commuter rewards. We want people to have a reason to try to commute. We provide rewards to them. There's employer-based marketing. So employers, they themselves are part of the marketing strategy that we use. We have GoPass 365. That's for those of you that are not familiar with that. That is employers, large ones like Newport News Ship, that's our flagship one, who allow and pay for their employees, up to 24,000 of them. Not all of them use it, but they could if they ask, to ride our buses at different locations throughout Hampton Roads, between point A, the bus location that picks them up, and point B, Newport News Ship. We have a lot of large companies that are doing that. Guaranteed ride program, there should be no reason not to do this, not because you're afraid that the driver is going to get sick. We will make sure that the participants get back to their point of origin. If there's a problem, we'll make sure that happens. Park and ride, park and sale. Locations throughout Hampton Roads, we have a park and sale. Carl Jackson is very familiar with that over in Portsmouth. By the way, Carl is our chairman of the Traffic Committee. So we do have the park and sale locations, but we have many locations throughout Hampton Roads, and that can all be found on our website, along with VDOT, and we communicate about where the park and rides are. Ride share matching, employer commuting surveys. We like to know where people are coming from. Companies often say, well, we need to get an idea where our employees live, so we can help with getting them to and from work. The two largest companies coming on board now is the Amazon locations, one in Chesapeake and one in Suffolk, and we are working with them daily on that. Not daily, weekly, I'm sorry. We're working with them weekly on trying to shore up transportation for their employees between where they live and where they work. Naval Station Norfolk office, the pandemic has created a bit of a strain on that because the base has been not so much closed, but close. But we still have our office there, and we still communicate with the commands, almost 300 commands on the base. Not only Norfolk's Naval Station, but other stations, military stations throughout Hampton Roads. We provide transit information, so it's not just about carpooling, vanpooling, and teleworking. We want people to get into a bus too. If it makes sense, get out of your car, get into a bus, and get to work or wherever it is you're going. And then we have the Vanpool Financial Assistance Program. That's a grant. Thank you, DRPT, for that grant. We subsidize vans so that people can actually afford to utilize vans. So it brings the cost down around $325 per month per van. As I mentioned earlier, less commuting, more teleworking. We've all, I think probably all of us here have been part of the teleworking program because of the pandemic. I know that at HRT, we certainly have. We conducted efforts at over almost 300 military commands just at Norfolk Naval Station. Contacted 35 new employers that we had not contacted previously. And these are new employers, not existing, but ones that have recently come into the area. Participated in community events. It initiated many program meetings with these employers. And the list goes on and on with what we do as an outreach company. We're not meeting face to face as much as we were back in FY19, and certainly not FY20, but FY21, we're starting to pick up a little bit of traction. This slide here is where the rubber meets the road. We now have over 14,000, almost 15,000 members that are part of the traffic program, whether it be carpooling or vanpooling, so on. New commuter members, 330 participating organizations. These are mostly the businesses throughout Hampton Roads that we have had direct contact with in one form or another. We've reduced emissions, carbon emissions by 1,300 tons. Reduced trips by 200,000 trips back and forth to work. Saved an average of 337 per. How do we know these numbers? I mean, 337, you say, well, how do they know that? Because people who are members of the traffics program, they actually register who they are and what they do. This does not include people that do not register, that we've affected or contacted and all that. These are registered participants in the program who go online and say, this is what I did today. I teleworked, I van pull, I carpool. They don't have to do that every day, but they do have to go in and put these numbers in. Commuters saved 1.6 million in commuting related expenses, whether it be insurance, gas, or whatever that would be. 3.7 million calories burned. How do we know that? Same way. They register online. They put in that they walk to work a mile or 2 miles, took the ferry from Portsmouth to Norfolk and walked to work. That's how we come up with those numbers. Commuters save 133,000 gallons of gas, same reasons. Guaranteed ride participants with 24 new registrations and 24 rides. That sounds low, but that's because they haven't really used the guaranteed ride program as much as they could. So we have a budget for that, and if there were many more participants, that budget would get hit much harder. But fortunately, these are the ones that we know that are doing the guaranteed ride. 26 registered van pools. That's an increase over FY20. 4 new van pools doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. It is, because if it carries 15 people, that's 15 times 4. That's 60 more people that are not driving their cars to work. GoPass revenue last year was about $500,000. I mentioned what that was, the GoPass program, with 4,900 ticket sales. So employers are using it, and that program is starting to come back as the pandemic issues change. And hopefully next year there will be even more to report. These are our financials. You don't have to necessarily read them unless you have some questions about it, but it shows you what we do, how much we spend as a part of the monies that we receive, and we try to use this in the most judicious way that we can, get the most bang for the buck. So competing differently, we have a creative campaign of awareness is really what it really comes down to. We want people to know who we are, what we do. We want people to call in. We want people to go to our website and see what the traffics program is about. And that has been pretty successful. We make calls out, but we also get calls in. So with the awareness campaign, people call in and say, tell me about this traffics program. I've heard about it on the radio, or I've seen a commercial or something of that nature. So we engage with participants and customers as much as we can through these means. But we do call, we do visit where we can. It all seems to work pretty well. The campaigns that we use are these. Here are some brochures. Thousands have been printed, thousands have been given out. Out of let's just say, the total number of brochures and other ways of reaching people, including billboards. I don't know if you've seen our billboards, but they are along Interstate 264. But we do get a lot of awareness callbacks from all of these things. We send brochures to companies that ask for us. We do cold calling with brochures and say, please provide these brochures to your employees. A number of ways that we do this. And now we have an app, Traffic's app now that is out there that helps people to see and feel what traffic is. This is one of the things I'm probably most proud of. These are 2 international awards that this region won. And we're talking about all 50 states, about 4 countries, including Australia and Canada and others. But the first one is the Outstanding TMA Award. That's the Transportation Management Association. presented to traffics at our ACT conference back in August. That was one award. To win 2 awards at that is very, very rare. But then we won also the Commuting Options Award, which is the Telecommunications Association for Commuter Transportation. Another, that should say international award versus national award. And then we won a much lesser award, but it's cool. The 2020 Best Print Marketing Campaign, Association for Commuter Transportation, for the Chesapeake chapter. The ACT, Association for Commuter Transportation, they have chapters throughout the country. And our chapter here is called Chesapeake chapter, so we won that too. So it's been, that's really a good thing. That concludes my presentation. I'd love to hear any questions you might have. Well, thank you very much.
Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I'd just like to say, Chair of the Traffic Committee, just thank Ron Hodges and the staff of traffic for the steadfast commitment to the region, even during this pandemic. And also to remind the committee that we'll be having the next meeting in March. We'll do a final review and approval of this annual report.
And I just wanted to mention too, that sometimes when we think of traffic, we tend to think of volume, especially when we're sitting on 64 and 5 miles back up at the high-rise bridge trying to get to a meeting. So when you think of taking 60 cars off the road when there's, 29,000 or 45,000 cars, it doesn't seem like a lot. But from a land use perspective, the idea of 4 parking spaces versus 60 parking spaces is actually a huge land use impact as well. Not just like traffic volume impact. So I think there's a lot to say about what traffic does impacts communities from a land use perspective too, not just from that traffic or carbon impact. So thank you for what you guys are doing. Were there any other comments or questions? Thank you. Item number 12 in your package is a 12-month tentative schedule. And it looks like we will be here March and April and May. Item 13, there's a couple of items in here for your information, including some meeting minutes and a presentation from another meeting that might be of interest.
So the second item is something we received from VTrans. OIP couldn't be here this month, but they gave us some information on their VTrans interactive website. It's a pretty useful website, so there's a link and also the presentation that OIP sent across if you have any questions. We hope to have them here at a future meeting, but they wanted to share this since they couldn't be here.
Item number 14, announcements. We have a board meeting coming up. Also, the TPS meeting is on Friday, the 18th, and VDOT had mentioned that there'll be a lot of information at that meeting. So people on that subcommittee will probably want to make sure that they're there. There'll be some funding updates that we'll all want to be aware of. For the Transportation Operations Subcommittee meeting coming up, the next TTAC meeting, and also the traffic meeting that Carl mentioned. Item number 15 is old or new business.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I do have a couple of announcements to add, just really quickly, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah. So first of all, as many of you may know, last week, the federal government released the RAISE Notice of Funding Opportunity under USDOT, and this is the first program to be rolled out from the IIJA we mentioned earlier. Now, the ask I have here is that if any of our localities or agencies do plan to submit an application for RAISE, and the maximum award is $25 million for a rural area or for an urban area, and the same for a rural area, but there is a minimum as well
For urban area, it's $5 million, and for the rural area, it's $1 million. So we would ask that if you would like a letter of support for an application that you may submit, if you can get those to us by March 2nd, which is our next TTAC meeting, and you can send those to me too, and we'll work with staff. Kathleen will put the letter together, and we'll get those out to you so you can include that with your application. The application deadline is April 14th, 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and should get the results no later than August 12th for the winners of those for that money. Secondly, as was mentioned, there's a TPS meeting on February 18th. Just wanted to add one item to that. Now we had to cancel our January meeting, so we are going to go ahead and do our TA set aside allocations for fiscal years 23 and 24. But in addition to that, we still are going to be allocating the 4 million, a little over 4 million RSTP reconciliation, and that does not require a local match for this pot of reconciliation money. We do have to have it allocated by April 1st of this year, and the monies must be obligated within 12 months of that date. And then the CMEC reconciliation, we have about 1.6 million. There is a local match required with that CMEC money. The CMEC money it works out to about 10%. So if you haven't already sent in your request to me, please do so. And if you could do that by the close of business on February 16th, so I can have that queued up and ready for the TPS meeting. That's all I have. Thank you.
And John, would it be possible to follow up those dates with an email out to everybody
So,
later today with those dates, just so that everybody's got them?
yeah, I can do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I had an announcement. So there's a regional transit advisory panel, which has organized a transit lobby day tomorrow at the General Assembly.
Excuse me, could you turn the
Oh,
mic? Carl, sorry.
all right. I need to repeat myself.
Do you mind?
The RTAC Regional Transit Advisory Panel has organized a lobby day tomorrow in Richmond at the General Assembly at 8:30. And I think you can contact Bob Crum, who's organizing that trip for more information.
So as background, the Regional Transit Advisory Panel was formed as part of legislation with HRT getting money as part of the statewide money that HRT got. So this group's been meeting since December 2020. We've had about 6 to 8 meetings, and maybe less than that, but they formed working groups, and the goal was what are ways we can strengthen and enhance transit in the region. One of the recommendations that came out of all the RTAP's work was talking about transit at the legislature, and that's what this advocacy, I think they call it Transit Equity and Advocacy Day. So I believe a lot of, I'm going up tomorrow, but there are RTAP members and some other HRT staff who are joining us, and also some locality staff, just to go and make the case for strong transit in the region. And as Carl mentioned, it starts at 8:30. We're trying to make the legislatures there, making the case for transit in the region. And there is a brochure that maybe I can send around after this meeting that came out of the work that RTAC had done. So it lays out the working groups, it lays out the recommendations, and kind of lists all the members of RTAC. So I will make sure to send that across after the meeting. And if you have any questions after me, contact me and I can follow up. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I had one additional announcement. Sometimes in December, someone on the locality staff should have received the email from VDOT concerning your urban street editions, your U1 packages. The deadline to submit those to the department for review was February the 1st. However, if you haven't submitted yours, would you please do so as soon as possible. Your resolution that goes with that package could be submitted a little bit later. Mid-April is probably the cutoff for the resolution. So if you haven't addressed those, would you please do so? Thank you.
And were there any other announcements, new rural business? With no other business, we're adjourned.
Yeah.